All right, thank you for your patience. We'll go ahead and get started. A couple of quick notes. We will not meet on Wednesday. We will not meet on Wednesday. If you are noting your syllabus, I'm a little bit ahead of schedule. We're scheduled to begin discussing chapter 13 next Monday. But I wanted us to at least get a good start on this chapter so that we can have a coherent discussion when we meet on Monday. So again, make note of this. Make note your second writing assignment is already posted, so get started on that. I highly recommend that you schedule some time or send me a rough draft of your paper well in advance of the final due date. You got a few weeks, so it's not due anytime soon, but as you know, time moves swiftly, and it's going to be the end of April before we know it, so I highly recommend you should get some feedback on that. You know that you'll get another quiz coming up here shortly, so we want to make sure we stay at the speed with the reading to make sure that we're in a strong position. As always, before you even start reading, kind of get a preview of what the chapter is going to be focused on, where it goes through the history of the juvenile system, dovetailing into contemporary criminal justice. We're going to look at juvenile sentencing structures. We spent a lot of time in the first half talking about sentencing guidelines and structures for adult offenders. So we want to be able to understand that for the juvenile correctional community as well. We look at intermediate sanctions, different trends in these processes, aftercare and reentry. So it's a pretty long chapter. So you're not gonna, so again, that's why I want to kind of get a start on it today. You don't have to sit down, or I would not encourage you to sit down and read the chapter all at once, give it in a little bit pieces. But if you give yourself about 15, 20 minutes a day, that should be more than sufficient. And then, you can get some extra credit if you, I'm not requiring this engage exercises, but you can get some extra credit if you do those. And more importantly, it'll give you a really good sense of where you stand and how well you comprehend this material. You don't have to find that out on quiz or paper day. So bear with me again. We will not meet on Wednesday. We will not meet for the whole entire time today, but I did want to at least get started on this chapter. So if you're just coming in, open up your text to chapter 13, and we're going to join in together. Make note again of different objectives of this chapter, of the things that you should know at the end of it. You would not be expected to have all these down today, but really challenge yourself to see how well you're understanding these, over the next few days. Make note of some of the key concepts in this chapter. Oftentimes, students will ask if I'm going to give a study guide. You got a really good study guide right here. The key concepts you need to know and objectives you should know at the end of this chapter. So let's get into the chapter in detail. Latasia Richardson, if you could begin reading here for me where it says 10 years ago, a friend of mine.
10 years ago, in response to sexual abuse of youth at the Texas Youth Commission institutions, the entire Texas
Slow down a little bit, Latasia.
Oh, my bad.
You good.
The entire Texas Youth Commission was placed under conservatorship guide and reformed the agency. The charges of sexual abuse first broke when a Texas Ranger investigation corroborated sexual contacts between residential males and two top supervisors at the West Texas State School in Pitote. The correctional employees were permitted to resign without charges being filed. Lawmakers found evidence that some youth residents had received lengthy sentences for refusing to have sex with correctional officers in the wake of the scandal. The Youth Commission's board of directors resigned, and many other top officials were ousted.
Good. Now, oftentimes, like when we meet in class, I'll ask you guys to kind of summarize what you read, and we sometimes struggle with this. You don't need to be perfect here, but just summarize in your own words, the story that Latasia just shared with us real quick. What happened there?
It was talking about how some of the facilities and stuff, the youth in Texas have been sexually assaulted. And I guess they started an investigation about it, adding everything and getting things back in order and stopping that.
Good. We hope so. Who assaulted them? Very good, Nigeria. Who assaulted them?
The officers there,
I'm sorry, say it again.
the officers there.
Good. So again, the chapter, like you won't be tested on this specific incident, but the author always kind of gives you a real life criminal story from the criminal justice system to kind of highlight some of the things we're going to be talking about later on. Do you all think that could have an impact upon the juvenile offenders that were assaulted? And if so, what impact do you think it might have?
Are you asking is like on them individually?
Yes. Yep.
Um,
No wrong answers. What do you think?
I feel like they're never going to forget that. I mean, some people can overcome it. It's some that takes somebody out, you know, because you don't know how much they can deal with, and something like that can take a toll on them.
Absolutely. And what toll do you all think they might have on them in the future? Like, how might that result in like actual behaviors? Anybody?
They might be aggressive.
I heard you say something. I think the first part was muted.
Who, me?
So what do you all think how do you think this will affect them in the future, particularly as it relates to their criminal behavior?
That's going to influence them in the future to commit crimes because of what happened to them in the past.
Good. It makes it less likely, very good, that they're going to be rehabilitated. As Nigeria said, human beings are very resilient. So it may be possible that they may really just muster up the will and still be able to overcome. But it shouldn't have to be just, okay, we're not trying to say, okay, well, look, you got to go through all this stuff and you just got to be strong enough to get through it. People, again, should not have to be going through those things in a juvenile facility center. As we said before, if people break the law, if people do harm to other people, there may be a need to keep them institutionalized. There may be a need to keep them away from other people. But if we're going to put them in there and expose them to behaviors that might make them worse at taxpayers' expense, no less, we really want to question those things. So, they're talking about, again, as we talked about throughout the prison, the whole class is focused on the correction system. So we want to look at what's going on in these correctional facilities, whether they be adult or juvenile, and how are these things actually helping to keep us safe and more protected? Because as we've talked about throughout, some of you all may have trouble sometimes, finding money for graduate school because although we do decent in terms of Pell Grants and giving money for undergraduate students, it don't be a lot of government funding for grad school, unfortunately. But we got all types of money to be putting people in cages. And if we have to put people in these cages, can we make it where people ain't getting raped and molested? Is that too much to ask? Sometimes it is. Latasha, let's continue on. But again, keep in mind when they give you these background stories in a moment, you're going to hear information that you will be tested on. So make sure that you see those connections. And again, we want to think critically about these processes. We don't just want to read this stuff and regurgitate back what we're reading. I really want you to be thinking about these things. And the key things that we want to keep in mind is this going to, is this going to keep the public safe? And or is this going to help, reform this juvenile to make it where they don't commit more crimes? The original goal of the penitentiary system. Latasha Richardson.
This photo shows the West Texas State School in Patti on Monday, March 5th, 2007. Late last month, state lawmakers questioned agency staff about an investigation in 2005 that had found evidence that high-ranking officials at the West Texas State School in Pott had repeated sexual contact with some of the 250 boys and young men housed there. An internal investigation found prison staff members had complained about the abuse to their supervisors, but that no one took action for more than a year.
So as other co-workers, they're like, hey, Nigeria is up here molesting these little boys, man. Y'all kind of need to do something about this. And the supervisor swept it under the rug, and the abuse unfortunately continued. Continue on, Latasha.
The Potter case did not put an end to the matter. Allegations of abuse in Texas have continued to come to public light. In 2015, a correctional officer at Evans Regional Juvenile Center was charged with official oppression, a Class A misdemeanor, for punching two incarcerated youths who had stolen a remote control at the center. A, di- a director of security at the same facility pleaded no contest to charges of tampering with physical evidence after he allegedly deleted a video showing another correctional officer beating a juvenile inmate. The correctional officer caught on video assaulting the youth received a year probation after he pled guilty to official oppression. These cases are not unique. Since 2013, there have been more than 4,000 reports of abuse and neglect in juvenile facilities in the state of Texas. According to state and county records, the majority of these cases involve reports of inappropriate or excessive use of force and issues stemming from restraints. There were 33 confirmed cases of abuse in 2015, the majority of which 22 were related to physical restraints. 8 involved sexual abuse, 4 involved verbal abuse, and 1 involved the provision of drugs, alcohol, tobacco, or weapons to youth. The professional consequences were less severe than in the wake of Pote. Approximately half of the employees involved in the 33 cases of abuse in 2015 were terminated from employment or they resigned. The other half were given probationary sanctions that ranged in length from
Probationary.
probationary citations that ranged in length from 3 to 12 months.
Good. Let's go a little bit more. Now we're going to start to get, when you start to see these text in blue, now we're getting some more things that are testable. Again, the author makes it really easy for you in terms of like how this book is laid out and the type of things that your antenna should really go up that you want to pay more attention to. So listen up closely here.
The victimization of youth in the Texas juvenile training schools is a sad commentary on institutionalizations in the juvenile justice system. However, Texas is not alone. A National Bureau of Justice Statistics survey of 18,138 adjudicated youth held in state-operated and large local or privately operated juvenile facilities found that about 10% representing 1,720 youth.
Slow down. Our goal is not just to get through the words as quickly as possible. Make sure that you understand what you're reading. So if I ask you to break this stuff down for me in a moment, that you'll understand. Go at your own pace.
Representing 1,720 youth nationwide reported experiencing one or more incidents of sexual victimization by another youth or faculty staff member in the previous months or since admission. Although these figures may be alarmingly high, they represent a sizable decrease in recent years. Among the most recent findings, about 2.5% of youth, 450 nationwide, reported an incident involving a peer, and alarmingly 7.7%, which is 1,390, reported incident involving faculty staff. About 3.5% of youth, 630, reported having sex or other sexual activity with faculty staff as a result of
facility staff
as a result of some type of force. 4.7% of youth, 850, reported contact with facility staff without force or threat. Approximately 92% of all youth reporting staff sexual misconduct said they had been victimized by female staff. 44% of staff in state juvenile facility were females.
Good. A little bit more.
In the midst of this bad news about juvenile institutionalization, there have also been some positive developments. In the last decade, California has closed 8 of its 11 juvenile facilities and successfully turned the responsibility for its nonviolent offenders over to community-based programs run by local counties. There has been an ongoing effort to transform and phase out the remaining state facilities that hold 1,000 more serious offenders. Spending on the system has dropped by almost half, from nearly $500 million to about $245 million, and the state has cut its juvenile offender population from about 10,000 in the mid 90s to less than 1,000 today. In
And good.
2000,
And I'm sorry. And I'm not going to test you on any kind of precise numbers. The numbers are giving you some context and some wider patterns. Where you saw that we had data where a lot of these juveniles are being abused, particularly of the sexual nature. As a result of that, a lot of those, because again, and why did they close these facilities? They told you, right, that they closed 8 out of 11. Why? Why did they close 8 out of 11? Now, this is what I mean. Like, you know, if we're reading all this stuff, and the question of why they closed them is difficult. Like, what are we doing?
it was because of the bad news about the juvenile incident.
Right. So all that data that you talked about there. So again, all this up here is relevant to this down here. So we just said, right? Like we just read it like 3 minutes ago. So it's telling you all these horrible numbers where you got people that are being raped, you got people that are being like subjected to violence, you got people that are guards that are slipping drugs and other weapons into the facilities. So they closed them because of these things. And why? That's not what we're paying our tax dollars for them to do. The purpose is, okay, look, Billy again is going through it right now at 14. We want to reform him so that he can get right before he get institutionalized at age 18 and 19. At which point it's going to be very difficult for him to turn his life around. If we're sending people to these facilities and that's not only is that not happening, but people are being abused, what are we going to keep them open for? They're not, again, we're throwing money at this stuff and it's not actually causing the solutions that we want to see. So yes, they closed them. They save a lot of money and they had a lot less juvenile offenders actually. So again, the purpose of this, we got to understand how all these processes are tied in together. Please, please make sure that you follow that. Continue on a little bit more.
In 2016, a lawsuit that had been litigated in the courts for more than a decade was finally settled. When first filed, the suit claimed that the California Youth Authority was expending funds on policies, procedures, and practices that were illegal under state law. It also claimed that the authority, now called the California Division of Juvenile Justice, DJJ, had failed in its statutory duties to provide adequate treatment and rehabilitation for juvenile offenders in its care, including medical, dental, and mental health care. On February 25th, 2016, a Superior Court judge terminated the suit on the basis that efforts have been ongoing to promote positive programs to rehabilitate youth in the juvenile justice system. California's closing of its schools is a hopeful sign that juvenile ins- institutionalization is experiencing widespread reform. Despite such positive indications, some critics are still concerned that without a state juvenile system to hold violent offenders, prosecutors may try more young people as adults, but the state can prevent this by monitoring and penalizing counties that over-prosecute juveniles and by allowing for extended custody in local facilities for those juveniles who have committed more serious crimes.
In the last paragraph.
This chapter examines how the juvenile justice system handles youth offenders. It also considers boot camps and adult prisons as placements for juvenile offenders. Juveniles transferred to adult courts and the changing sentencing structures for juvenile offenders. These are critical issues because so many juveniles who have been processed through the justice system later end up in the adult correctional system.
Good. And make note there, I highlight that for a reason. And again, keep this in mind for yourself, where a lot of times during lecture, a great deal of effort and energy is put into writing down what I'm going to put in the PowerPoint, and all of this information is available for you. So again, you can highlight it there for yourself, the important points that I think will again be a lot easier for you to retain and remember anyway than the things that you get secondhand from me. But keep in mind what all this is talking about, right? That we've talked about in previous chapters that we had this huge prison population in the 80s and 90s. A lot of that stemmed from people that went through juvenile facilities that did not get properly reformed and rehabilitated. And if we're going to continue to throw again like money in an increasingly broke country at these things, they should be producing a lot better than that. So more and more facilities are being closed as a result. Now, Jerry, can you pick up on the history of the juvenile system for me? Thank you very much, Latasha.
You said the history?
Yeah, 13.1, the history of the juvenile justice system.
Okay. Independent but interrelated with the adult criminal justice system, the juvenile justice system is primarily responsible for dealing with minors who violate the criminal law, and also those youth who have not committed crimes but are incorrigible, truant, runaway, or unmanageable behaviors forbidden for underage children. How did this system develop?
And I'm sorry, they gave you two testable terms here. So these are things you definitely want to make note of and go back to. Again, don't just make sure that we're not just reading these things. Make sure that you understand what you're reading and why it's important. Continue on.
How did this system develop? Juvenile justice in the United States began in the colonial period and continued to use English practices. The family, the cornerstone of the community in colonial times, was the source and primary means of social control of children. The law was uncomplicated. The only law enforcement officials were town fathers, magistrates, sheriffs, and watchmen, and the only penal institutions were jails for prisoners awaiting trial or punishment. Juvenile lawbreakers did not face a battery of police or other authorities, nor did they have to worry about the practitioners of the juvenile justice system, which tried to rehabilitate or correct them. They only had to concern themselves with being sent back to their families for punishment. As children got older, however, the likelihood increased that they would be dealt with more harshly by colonial law. The state, even those early days, clearly was committed to raising its children correctly and making them follow society's rules. Indeed, this early practice appears to have been incorporated into the early Massachusetts Puritan Code, which along with the state's constitution was a model for the U.S. Constitution of 1787. The state became even more concerned about the welfare of its children in the 1800s. Increased urbanization, industrialization, and bureaucratization were changing the face of America. In the cities, particularly, increasing numbers of youth were seemingly out of control. Reformers searched for ways to teach them traditional values, and asylum and the training school were developed to help the state maintain its control.
Good, Nigeria. So I don't expect you all to be perfect with that, but somebody, anybody, summarize, and it can be you if you want, Nigeria. Summarize what you just read there on that page. Just give me a summary of everything that was there. Not a word for word, play by play. If I ask you what movie you saw me this weekend and what happened, you wouldn't tell me, you read the whole last of the movie for me. So summarize what you just read there. All right, Nigeria, let's go back up to the beginning and read it again. Independent of, but interrelated.
You want me to start from the beginning?
Yes.
Independent of but interrelated with the adult criminal justice system, the juvenile justice system is primarily responsible for dealing with minors who violate the criminal law, juvenile delinquents, and also those youth who have not committed crimes but are incorrigible, truant, runaway, or unmanageable behaviors forbidden for underage children status offenders.
Okay, so let's stop there. Let's stop there because by the time we get to the bottom of the page, we might forget that a whole 2 minutes from now. Summarize this paragraph. What is the author saying here? Because if we're reading this stuff, but we can't answer these questions, it's like we're working out, trying to lose weight, but we're not, we're running in place. You don't have to be perfect here today, but let's try.
It's basically just bringing about, well, telling us about how the juvenile system came into play, and specifically what it means for to be a juvenile
Delinquent.
or a juvenile delinquent.
And how do you become a juvenile delinquent?
By committing crimes like
what kind of crime?
well, no, they have not committed crimes, but they run away and they are unmanageable.
And what are those?
With.
Good. And those are called status offenses. So those are called status offenses. So crimes, and these are crimes, Malik, that are only criminal for juveniles. If I want to run away from home, I could do that, and ain't nobody can't nobody stop me, ain't nobody gonna come looking for me. A 14-year-old was different. So again, status offenses are behaviors that are strictly prohibited by juveniles, and if you violate those status offenses, what do you become? If you violate those status offenses, what do you become?
Offender.
No.
A juvenile delinquent.
Yes.
Oh.
Let's continue.
How did the system develop? Juvenile justice in the United States began in the colonial period and continued to use English practices. The family, the cornerstone of the community in colonial times, was the source and primary means of social control of children. The law was uncomplicated. The only law enforcement officials were town fathers, magistrates, sheriffs, and watchmen, and the only penal institutions were jails for prisoners awaiting trial or punishment. Juvenile lawbreakers did not face a battery of police or other authorities, nor did they have to worry about practitioners of the juvenile justice system would try to rehabilitate or correct them. They only had to concern themselves with being sent back to their family for punishment.
Summarize this paragraph. Anybody? Pretty straightforward.
It discussed how the system developed over time, and it's discussed like the cornerstone, like where it originally originated from.
Somewhat.
No, they didn't have to worry about the courts. The only thing they had to worry about was getting sent back to their families for punishment. So the courts didn't punish them, their families did.
2 extra credit points from Sage. Jesus Christ. Let's go with the next paragraph.
As children got older, however, the likelihood increased that they would be dealt with more harshly by colonial law. The state, even those early days, clearly was committed to raising its children correctly and making them follow society's rules. Indeed, this early practice appears to have been incorporated into the early Massachusetts Puritan Code, which along with state's constitution was a model for the U.S. Constitution of 1787.
Good, and one more paragraph.
The state became even more concerned about the welfare of its children in the 1800s, increased urbanization, industrialization, and bureaucratization were changing the face of America, and the cities, particularly increasing numbers of youth, were seemingly out of control. Reformers searched for ways to teach them traditional values, and the asylum and the training school were developed to help the state maintain its control.
Now, how would you summarize these last 2 paragraphs? Keep in mind what we talked about in the first 2.
Okay, the last 2 paragraphs summarize saying that the government was starting to worry about the way kids was being upbrown. Good. Because of the urbanization and industrialization that was coming about. So good. Like the newer generation, they want to make sure the kids were like following the church society morals.
Very good. What extra credit point, Malik? So again, now society is changing very fast. You got more and more people through urbanization, so you're getting bigger cities. You get the industrialization, the way the work is being done, the laws are changing. So the way that we may have okay, back in the day, what did we do, Latasia, if a kid got unruly?
You send them back to their family.
Good. That's because that ain't working as effectively anymore. Like, okay, you know, because hell, back in the day, it might have been, you know, you would have been more scared. Like, I want to see you back in my, okay, I'm sorry, I'm gonna act right, I'm gonna go to school tomorrow, I promise. But now it's getting the population is getting too big to do that, and the kids seem to be getting more and more unruly. So they got to find a way to try and do something for the little kids. Let's find out what that is. Continue on, Nigeria. Now look, all the things that we talked about already, right? I go to inform what we talk about here. Much of this stuff is very straightforward, so don't overthink it. Continue on. And read exactly what they say. Don't try and interpret. Just look at exactly what the author is saying.
The early courts took control of juvenile under the concept of parent patriae,
Good.
a Latin term used to signify the role of the kings as the father of his country. The concept was first used by English kings to establish their right to intervene in the lives of the children of their vassals. Children whose position and property were of direct concern to the monarch. As time passed, the monarchy used parents patriae more and more to justify its intervention in the lives of families and children to protect their general welfare. Parents patriae was brought over and used in American courts, being formalized in the case of Ex parte Kraus in 1838, which gave the courts a legal basis for intervening in the lives of children. The Bill of Rights, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled, did not apply to minors, and the state could legitimately confine minors who needed protection. This meant that the juveniles did not have the right to counsel or trial by jury and could be confined even in the absence of criminal behavior.
Now, there's a lot of details in this paragraph, the most that we've gotten so far. What's the author saying here? Again, do your very best. It ain't got to be perfect, but, you know, again, we talked about how it was in the 1700s, in the early 1800s, to, you know, the kids get to be a little bit more unruly. So how did the court start to respond to this? Don't worry about repeating the Latin terms. Just, you know, tell me what happened. Y'all know it.
I'm guessing
Basically,
the father, the king of his, whatever they said, he has to say so on what their punishment is, I'm guessing. I don't know.
To a degree. Let's read. Anybody else want to try it? We can read it again if need be.
yeah, basically, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, you good, Malik, go ahead.
Somebody.
Okay, I was gonna say, the king, he basically, the justice gave him the king power to intervene in the children's life. So, like, if they weren't doing right, he had to say something to tell them, like, you had X amount of time to make sure your kid behaved in this way.
Good, excellent. One extra credit point. So the king, like, so it's like, look, Latasia, your kid keep acting up. We tried to send him back to you. He keep wilding out in the streets. So now we're going to take this parental role. We, the government or the king, we're going to take this parental role from you. And we're going to effectively, like, you know, all these kids, we finna make the law where, like, look, everybody, every child in the state, all of them are pretty much our children. And if you ain't doing what you got to do as a parent, we're going to intervene on your behalf. Simple as that. Very good, Malik. Very, 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 very straightforward, I believe. So this is how today, right? Can the state take your kids if you ain't doing what you're supposed to do?
Yes.
Absolutely. This is where it all came from. Initially, it's like, okay, look, that's you and your kids' problems. But when your juvenile is out here like breaking into my house every other week, it ain't just okay, it's like you and your family problem. It's everybody's problem. So to minimize that problem, since Latasia ain't going to do it, we're going to intervene and do it for her. And this is the legal foundation that established all this. So again, when it talks about, right, and then really important down here, right? So now we're not just gonna send you home. You're going to be sent to court. And we talked about the rights of inmates in previous chapters is really important. These points down here are crucially important. Again, this ain't in blue. You got to really be reading and understanding how criminal justice work, and hopefully interested in how criminal justice work, and that makes it a lot more accessible to you. But what it's saying here is that when they get to court, right, They ain't got all them same rights that adults get. We'll talk about this some more next Monday. Take Wednesday to, so we're on 13-1 now. Nigeria, 1 extra credit point for reading this for me. I know some of the Latin was pretty difficult, but get familiar with that because it's going to be all types of Latin when you get to graduate school, and if you get to law school, they still use a lot of the original Latin. The more you see it, the easier to get. But when we meet on Monday, I need a little bit better, a lot more attempts at actually trying to understand this stuff. Don't just think, okay, I'm going to memorize these definitions, because a lot of time the way we try to study is let me try and memorize parens patriae. But if you don't understand all of this information, it won't make as much sense. Get started on your papers. Keep reading up for any pop quizzes that may come up, and I'll see you all next Monday.